I was driving through the mountains late one night, sometime around early autumn, when the fog rolled in so thick that I could barely see past the hood of my car. I'd been on the road since sunset, trying to get home after visiting family across the state. The route I took was the long one, a winding mountain highway that curved endlessly through dense forest, with steep drops on one side and sheer rock faces on the other. I'd done that drive a few times before, but never at night and never in fog this bad. It had started out fine. The first few hours were just quiet, empty highway, the kind where the only lights are your own and the occasional pair of distant headlights miles away. The air was cool, clean, and the roads were dry. But as I climbed higher into the mountains, the temperature dropped and the mist started to appear. It began as a light haze, low to the ground, then thickened fast, rolling across the road in pale, shifting waves until it swallowed everything ahead of me. The visibility dropped to almost nothing. My high beams just bounced off the fog, so I kept them low and crept along at maybe 20 miles an hour, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. The trees on either side of the road were barely visible, just vague shadows sliding past in the mist. Every now and then I'd catch sight of a reflective road marker or a guardrail and feel a brief flicker of relief that I was still on the right path. The thing about driving in fog that thick is how it messes with your sense of distance and direction. Everything feels closer than it is, and every turn looks like it's about to drop you off the edge of the mountain. The silence doesn't help either. Once I turned off the radio to concentrate, the world outside felt completely empty. No insects, no wind, just the low hum of the engine and the faint crunch of gravel under the tires. I started to notice how alone I was. No other cars had passed in almost an hour, and there weren't any houses or pull-offs this high up. Just miles of twisting, narrow road through black trees and white fog. My headlights cut out maybe 30 feet ahead, then vanished into nothing. It was like driving through a dream that could shift at any second. The higher I went, the thicker it got. There were moments I couldn't even see the center line, and I'd have to slow to a crawl and hope I wasn't drifting too close to the edge. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and my shoulders ached from staying so tense. Every curve in the road felt sharper than it should have been. Then, out of nowhere, the fog ahead of me seemed to move, like it wasn't just mist, but something heavy sliding across the road. I slowed even more, squinting, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was subtle at first, just vague shapes low to the ground, maybe 20 or 30 yards ahead. The shapes shifted, then froze, solidifying out of the gray. For a few seconds, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Then I realized what it was: a herd of elk. They were massive, dark outlines in the mist, dozens of them, standing completely still across both lanes of the road. Their breath hung in the air like smoke, and their eyes reflected the headlights in dull, glassy flashes. Some were facing me, others sideways, their antlers tangled in the low fog like black branches. The closest one was huge, maybe 6 feet tall at the shoulder, and it just stared at me, unblinking. I hit the brakes slowly, letting the car roll to a stop. The silence that followed was so deep it felt physical, pressing against the glass. I could hear the ticking of the engine cooling and the faint patter of mist hitting the windshield. The elk didn't move. None of them did. For a long moment, I just sat there, frozen, staring at the herd. There must have been 30 of them at least, maybe more hidden behind the fog. The way they stood, completely still, all facing slightly different directions, made it feel wrong somehow, like they were waiting for something. I'd seen deer before, plenty of them, and they always bolted the second they caught sight of a car. These didn't. They just stood there, silent, their shapes faintly swaying in the fog, their breath rising and fading like ghosts. I couldn't go forward, and I couldn't turn around. The road was too narrow, and there was no shoulder, just a drop-off somewhere to my right. So I sat there with my foot on the brake, watching the mist swirl around their legs. A few of them started to move then, slowly, deliberately crossing the road one by one. The sound was strange, muffled by the fog. Hooves on asphalt, quiet but heavy, like dull knocks against wood. I could barely see more than a few at a time as they passed through the headlights, disappearing into the gray on the other side. But every few seconds, another shape would emerge, huge and dark and silent. I realized how easy it would have been to slam into them if I'd been driving any faster. They blended so perfectly into the fog that I wouldn't have known they were there until it was too late. The thought of hitting one of those massive animals on a road like this at night with no one around made my stomach twist. It took a long time for the herd to clear the road. I watched them move into the trees, vanishing almost immediately into the white. Soon there were only a few stragglers left, a smaller elk hesitating near the center line, then one last big one that stood for a while watching me. Then it turned and followed the others into the woods. For a minute after they were gone, I still didn't move. The fog hung low and dense, and the road ahead looked emptier than before. The silence stayed, thicker somehow, like the air hadn't settled yet. I finally eased off the brake and crept forward. My headlights caught nothing but fog and pavement again. The smell of damp pine drifted through the vents. For a while, I drove slowly, expecting to see them again around every turn. But the road stayed empty. After about 10 minutes, I reached a stretch where the fog started to thin out. The air brightened slightly, and I could see the outlines of the forest again. Dark walls of trees rising on either side. When I looked in the rearview mirror, the fog behind me looked like a solid wall, swallowing the road completely. Eventually, I made it down the mountain and found a small gas station at the edge of a town. The lights felt blinding after all that darkness. I got out, stretched my legs, and noticed how shaky my hands were. My car was covered in a fine layer of dew and dust from the drive, and the headlights were smeared with fog residue. The clerk inside told me that herds of elk often moved through those passes at night, especially in the colder months. They'd cross the road in groups, silent and slow, usually sticking together until they cleared the danger. She said drivers hit them all the time. That stuck with me. The idea that those few seconds of slowing down, that brief shape I'd noticed through the fog, had probably saved me from a wreck I wouldn't have walked away from. I finished the drive home in daylight the next morning, and the road looked completely different. Open, quiet, beautiful even. It was hard to believe how menacing it had felt just hours before. But ever since that night, fog has bothered me. Even light mist on a back road brings it back. The pale shapes, the silence, the way the fog swallowed the road and made the world shrink down to a few feet of gray light. What unsettled me most wasn't the elk themselves, but how easily the whole situation could have gone wrong. If I'd been going just a little faster, if I'd blinked at the wrong moment, I would have plowed straight into them. On that narrow mountain road, with no guardrails in places and nothing but steep drops below, it wouldn't have taken much to end up off the edge. Now, whenever I drive at night, especially in fog, I think about that moment. The headlights cutting through the mist, the herd appearing out of nowhere, motionless and silent. The image burned into my mind isn't the fear of crashing. It's that stillness, that impossible quiet in the middle of the mountains, when the world felt frozen, and I was the only thing moving in it. It was around midnight when I decided to drive back home from my friend's place. He lived about 60 miles out of town, in a small community surrounded by flat farmland and stretches of dark, empty road that seemed to go on forever. I'd stayed later than I planned, and by the time I got into my car, the temperature had dropped, the air felt heavy, and the roads were completely deserted. The only light came from the pale glow of my dashboard and the narrow beams of my headlights cutting through the dark. I didn't think much about it at first. I'd driven at night plenty of times, but something about that drive felt different from the moment I pulled onto the highway. The road stretched straight for miles, nothing but asphalt, fields, and the occasional fence post sliding past in my peripheral vision. My headlights reflected off a thin layer of fog hovering close to the ground, making it look like I was driving through smoke. The silence inside the car felt too deep. I turned off the radio because even the music sounded wrong in that emptiness. All I could hear was the steady hum of the tires and the faint rattle of something loose in the glove compartment. About 15 minutes into the drive, I saw a shape far up ahead. It was small at first, something pale reflecting the light. Maybe an animal, I thought. But as I got closer, it became clearer that it wasn't moving. It was just sitting there in the middle of the lane. I slowed down, squinting through the fog. It looked like a large cardboard box or maybe a piece of furniture someone had dumped. I eased the car over the center line to go around it, and as I passed, I caught a glimpse. It wasn't a box. It was a broken down stroller, the kind people use for babies, tipped on its side with one wheel missing. It startled me enough that I checked my mirrors, thinking maybe someone had left it there after an accident. But there was no one. No car lights behind me, no houses nearby. Just that empty stroller fading in the distance as I drove away. I told myself not to overthink it. People dumped stuff all the time. Still, it made me uneasy. The road curved after that, leading into a long stretch lined with trees. I'd driven that way a dozen times in daylight, but at night it looked completely different. Just a tunnel of blackness with my headlights lighting up the tree trunks for a split second as I passed. I noticed something else then. Every time I looked in my mirrors, it felt like there was movement far behind me, but when I focused on it, there was nothing, just darkness. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks. Maybe the fog was catching the light wrong. I tried to shake it off. About halfway through the wooded stretch, I saw something again. A faint red light off to the right side of the road. At first I thought it was a tail light from a parked car, but as I got closer, I realized it was too low to the ground. It looked like a single bicycle light, blinking faintly. I slowed down, scanning the area with my headlights. That's when I saw the bike. It was lying on its side in the grass, front wheel bent inward. The red light was still blinking on the back, weak and uneven, but there was no rider. I pulled off onto the shoulder for a second, thinking maybe someone had crashed and needed help. I left the engine running and leaned over to look out the passenger window. The bike looked like it had been there for a while. The grass was flattened around it, but I didn't see anyone. I honked once, thinking maybe someone would come out of the woods or call back, but nothing. The silence after the horn died out was sharp. I didn't want to get out. Something deep in my stomach told me not to. It wasn't fear exactly, just instinct, the kind that tells you to stay put when something doesn't feel right. After a minute, I drove off again, telling myself that whoever left it probably got picked up already or walked home. The fog got thicker after that, to the point where I could only see about 20 feet ahead. I had to slow down to a crawl. My headlights bounced off the mist, making it hard to tell where the road ended and the fields began. I kept one eye on the faint yellow lines just to stay centered. The clock on the dash said it was 12:47 a.m. I still had another 40 minutes to go. Then I saw the shape of a car on the side of the road up ahead. It was half off the shoulder, one of its doors slightly open. The hazard lights were flashing, but weakly, the battery probably dying. As I rolled closer, I could see the car had hit something. The front end was crumpled, and there was a long skid mark behind it. But again, no one was around. I slowed almost to a stop, peering through the fog, scanning the ditch, the road, anywhere someone might have gone. Nothing. That feeling in my chest came back stronger. The kind that presses against your ribs when you know something's not right. I decided not to stop this time. I kept going, heart beating faster. The sight of that empty, damaged car fading into the fog behind me. For the next few miles, I didn't see anything. No more lights, no more signs of life. Just the fog, the road, and the constant vibration of the tires against the asphalt. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and I realized I'd been leaning forward slightly, as if bracing for something. I tried to calm down, telling myself I was overreacting, but that didn't help much. Then I started to notice something strange in the rearview mirror again. A pair of faint headlights, far behind me. They were small at first, almost blending into the fog, but they didn't go away. Every time I checked, they were still there, always at the same distance. Not gaining on me, not falling back, just following. I told myself it was probably another driver heading home, but I couldn't shake the unease. The road was empty for miles before that. Where had they come from? I decided to test it. I slowed down a little, watching the mirror. The headlights slowed too. I sped up, they matched my speed perfectly. My mouth went dry. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to stop, but I didn't want to keep leading whoever it was deeper into nowhere. After a few minutes of this, I came up on a small gas station, one of those 24-hour ones with just 2 pumps and a single light buzzing above the awning. I pulled in quickly, hoping whoever was behind me would just keep going. I parked near the pump but didn't get out. I turned off my headlights but left the engine running. The car behind me came around the bend, and right as it reached the gas station, its headlights turned off too. It slowed down, past the entrance, then stopped just a little way down the road. I could see the faint outline of it through the fog, no lights, no movement, just sitting there. I waited, maybe 2 minutes, felt longer. Finally, I put the car in drive and pulled back out, deciding to just get home and not look back. When I glanced in the mirror again, the car had started moving too. No headlights, just rolling behind me. At that point, I was sweating. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I didn't want to speed too much and lose control on the foggy road, but I also couldn't bring myself to stop. The next 20 minutes felt endless. I kept glancing at the mirror, and every time I did, I could see faint shapes. The other car still back there, barely visible in the haze. Finally, I reached the edge of town. Streetlights appeared, breaking up the fog. I turned onto a main road, then another, winding toward my neighborhood. I checked the mirror again, the car was gone. No lights, no shadow following. Just me. When I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking so hard I had trouble turning the key to shut the car off. I sat there for a while, trying to slow my breathing, staring out at the quiet street. Nothing, no movement, just the low hum of the engine cooling down. The next morning, I saw something strange. On the side of my car, near the back bumper, there was a long, muddy handprint, smeared, like someone had tried to grab hold while I was driving. It wasn't mine. That's when it hit me, the stroller, the bike, the wrecked car, they weren't random. Someone must have been setting them up along the road, trying to make people stop. Maybe I hadn't been the first one to drive that way at night. Maybe the person in that other car was waiting for whoever did. I never drove that road again after dark. I take the highway now, even though it's longer. At least there are lights, cameras, and people. I'd rather deal with traffic than the silence of that road, and the thought of whatever was out there that night, waiting in the fog. It was almost 1 a.m. when I started the drive home. I had been visiting my cousin out in the next county, and I stayed later than I meant to. I didn't really plan it that way, but time got away from me, and by the time I got back to my car, the streets were empty. It was one of those warm summer nights where the air feels heavy and the sky hangs low, and you can smell the fields after a long day of heat. I knew the drive would take about an hour and a half, most of it through quiet, empty backroads that cut through farmland and small patches of woods. I wasn't worried. I've always liked driving at night. It's quiet, peaceful. I filled up at a gas station just before getting on the highway. I grabbed a cold bottle of water, checked my phone for messages, and then hit the road. Once I got out of town, everything fell into that usual rhythm. Engine humming, tires whispering against the asphalt, headlights stretching into the dark. The road was straight for miles, with nothing but open fields and tree lines on both sides. Every now and then, a farmhouse light flickered in the distance, but for the most part, it felt like I was the only person awake in the world. After maybe 40 minutes, I turned onto County Road 47. That stretch always gave me an odd feeling. It's one of those roads that doesn't see much maintenance anymore. Uneven shoulders, cracks in the pavement, no reflectors, and barely any signage. The kind of road where you start to realize how far you are from everything else. My headlights lit up the narrow strip in front of me, and beyond that was just blackness. No streetlights, no houses, just miles of dark farmland. I rolled down my window halfway to keep myself awake. The air was cooler now, with that faint smell of cut grass and dirt. I had my phone plugged in, music playing quietly, but after a while, I turned it off. There was something about the sound of the tires and the night air that was strangely calming. I drove for another 10 or 15 minutes before I saw something up ahead. It was small at first, just a dark shape lying across the road. I slowed down a little, expecting it to be a branch or maybe a dead animal. As I got closer, the shape started to take form. It wasn't a branch. It was a bicycle. The front tire was bent sideways, and the handlebars were twisted. It looked like it had been hit or maybe dropped. There was no light on it, no reflectors, just a simple black bike, sitting right in the middle of the lane. I slowed down even more and came to a stop a few feet away. I waited for a moment, staring at it through the windshield, half expecting someone to step out of the darkness to grab it. But no one did. I turned on my hazard lights and looked around. Nothing. No houses nearby, no driveways, no glow from another vehicle. I rolled my window down a little more and listened. The night was dead quiet except for the faint buzz of insects in the distance. I thought about getting out to move the bike off the road, but something about the stillness made me hesitate. The way it was placed, right in the middle of the lane, didn't feel like an accident. It looked deliberate. I decided to drive around it instead. There was enough space on the shoulder, and I didn't want to be sitting there in the dark any longer than necessary. I eased the car to the right, tires crunching against the gravel, and passed it slowly. My headlights caught the rear wheel as I went by, and I could see that the back reflector had been snapped clean off. As soon as I passed, I checked my mirrors. The bike looked smaller and smaller behind me until it disappeared completely into the darkness. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself that maybe someone had crashed and already walked for help. Still, I couldn't stop glancing back, half expecting to see someone step onto the road behind me. A few miles later, I saw another car for the first time that night. It came up behind me fast, its headlights bright and steady. I figured it would pass me, but it didn't. It stayed behind me, close enough that the glare filled my mirrors. I sped up slightly, but the car matched me. I slowed down and it slowed down too. At first, I thought maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe they were nervous about the dark road, or maybe their headlights were just brighter than normal. But after 5 solid minutes of it, I started to feel uneasy. The car wasn't trying to pass, wasn't backing off. It was just sitting there, holding a steady distance, too close for comfort. I tried tapping my brakes lightly to see if they'd take the hint, but they didn't. The headlights stayed exactly where they were. My pulse started to rise, and I could feel the tension in my arms as I gripped the steering wheel. I started thinking about that bike again, about how it was placed perfectly across the road, like someone had wanted a car to stop. After another mile or so, the road came to an intersection. I took a left onto an even narrower road I didn't usually use, hoping the car would keep going straight. For a second, it looked like it worked. The headlights faded in my mirror as I made the turn. But then, not even 10 seconds later, I saw the glow of lights again. The same car had turned too. That's when the fear really set in. My whole body felt tight, every sense on high alert. I didn't know what to do. I didn't have cell signal this far out, and there wasn't a gas station or a house in sight. It was just me, an empty road, and whoever was behind me. I focused on the road, keeping my speed steady, trying to think clearly. I spotted a small dirt pull-off up ahead, a farm access road or something similar, and made a split-second decision. I slowed down, flicked on my blinker, and turned onto it. Then, without stopping, I killed my headlights and rolled forward slowly, deeper into the dark. The road was narrow and bumpy, lined with trees on both sides. I kept creeping forward until I was far enough off the main road that I could barely see it through the branches. Then I stopped completely and waited. My car was silent except for the faint ticking of the cooling engine. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I leaned forward, eyes locked on the faint glow of the highway beyond the trees. Within seconds, the other car came into view. Its headlights swept past slowly, scanning both sides of the road. I watched as it slowed down almost to a crawl right where I had turned. The driver didn't stop, but they didn't speed away either. The car crept past, then continued down the road until its lights faded out completely. I sat there in the dark for several minutes, not moving, barely breathing. I didn't want to turn my lights back on too soon in case they were still nearby. Eventually, when I was sure they were gone, I started the car again and turned back toward the highway, keeping my headlights dim. The rest of the drive home, I didn't see another vehicle. Not one. No taillights, no headlights behind me, nothing. Just the road stretching on forever under the pale glow of my beams. I didn't relax until I pulled into my driveway at almost 3 in the morning. I shut the engine off, locked the doors immediately, and just sat there for a few minutes before going inside. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of what happened. It didn't feel random. The bike on the road, the car following me, it all felt connected somehow. I looked online later that day to see if there were any reports of accidents or suspicious activity on County Road 47, but there was nothing. No mention of a bicycle, no mention of a stranded driver, nothing. A week later, I drove that same route again during the day. I found the exact spot where the bike had been lying, but the road was empty. No sign of tire marks, no broken glass, nothing to show it had ever been there. I pulled over and got out for a moment. The silence during the day was just as heavy as it had been that night. The fields stretched out in every direction, flat and endless, with nowhere to hide. Yet somehow it still felt like someone was watching. To this day, I don't know who was in that car or what they wanted. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but deep down, I don't think so. Whoever they were waiting for someone to stop. Maybe they'd done it before. Maybe they were hoping for an easier target. I still think about what might have happened if I had gotten out to move that bike off the road. If I had stopped for just 1 minute longer. Now, whenever I drive at night, I never stop for anything on the road. Not for a bike, not for a box, not even for what looks like a person. I keep driving because that night taught me something I'll never forget. On those empty roads, miles from anyone else, you have no idea who's waiting in the dark or how close they already are. When I was in my early 20s, I spent a few weeks working with my dad in a remote wooded area of northern Wisconsin. He did seasonal maintenance work for a small logging company, and I helped whenever he needed an extra pair of hands. That particular job was different from the usual ones, though. We were staying out in a small cabin on company land, several miles from the nearest paved road. The cabin was meant for workers who needed to stay near the site overnight. Nothing fancy. 2 rooms, a stove, a table, and 2 bunks. No internet, no cell signal, no electricity beyond a small generator that ran a single light bulb and a few outlets. The nearest neighbor was at least 10 miles away. It was early autumn and the days were still warm, but the nights were already dropping close to freezing. The cabin sat right at the edge of a thick forest, surrounded by pine and birch. During the day, it felt peaceful. The forest smelled clean, the air sharp, the wind moving gently through the branches. You could hear distant machinery sometimes, but mostly it was quiet. Just the occasional call of a bird or the thump of a falling branch somewhere deeper in the woods. My dad would leave early each morning to check equipment farther down the logging road. I stayed behind some days to work on smaller things near the cabin, stacking wood, fixing tools, keeping the generator running. It wasn't hard work, just slow, repetitive tasks that left a lot of time to think. The first few days were normal. At night, we'd sit by the stove, eat simple meals, and listen to the wind. The sounds of the forest always carried around the cabin: crickets, owls, sometimes the faint rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. You could tell how deep into night it was by the shift in the noises. Around midnight, everything usually quieted, but never completely. There was always some distant sound, something living, something natural. Then one night, everything went still. It was like someone had flipped a switch on the entire forest. No wind, no insects, not even the creak of trees swaying. Just absolute silence. I didn't notice it right away. It crept in slowly, until it was so complete that the absence of sound felt heavier than noise itself. I remember sitting on the edge of my bunk, realizing I couldn't even hear the generator anymore. It had shut off sometime in the night. I got up and looked out the window. The darkness outside was thick, the kind of black where your eyes never adjust. The cabin was surrounded by tall trees that swayed just slightly, but I couldn't hear them move. It was unsettling, so quiet that it felt like the world itself was holding its breath. I told myself it was just the generator dying and the still air making everything feel stranger than it was. But even after I stepped outside to restart it, the silence didn't change. No insects flew near the light, no small sounds at all. I walked a few yards away from the cabin, looking up at the trees, and the feeling that something was nearby hit me hard. It wasn't a sound or a sight. It was just that deep, sharp instinct that someone or something was close, watching. The woods felt too big then, too close. The air had that thick, muffled quality you only notice right before a storm, except there were no clouds, no wind, no reason for it. I went back inside, bolted the door, and tried to sleep. The next morning, things seemed normal again. Birds were calling, the trees were moving, the world felt alive. I mentioned to my dad that it had been oddly quiet, but he just shrugged it off. He'd spent years out in the woods and said silence happens sometimes, but I couldn't shake the memory of it. The stillness had been too deep, too sudden, like something had scared everything else away. That night, the quiet came back. It started the same way, the forest slowly dimming in sound until there was nothing. The generator still ran this time, humming softly, but everything outside was dead quiet again. I tried to ignore it, but I kept catching faint, irregular sounds, soft crunches of something moving on dry leaves, far off at first, then closer. I turned off the light, thinking maybe it was drawing animals in. For a while, nothing happened. Then, faintly, I heard a branch snap somewhere near the tree-line. Not loud, not fast, just the sharp crack of weight on wood. Then another, then nothing again. I sat still for almost an hour, staring at the window, trying to catch movement in the dark. The silence made it impossible to tell how far away the sounds were. They could have been 50 feet or right outside the wall. The next day, I found what looked like faint footprints in the dirt near the edge of the cabin clearing. Not boot prints exactly, but smudged impressions, like someone had been walking barefoot in soft ground. They were uneven and scattered, but definitely human-shaped. I didn't mention them to my dad. I figured they could have been from someone else who'd worked there before us, but they looked fresh. That night, he didn't come back to the cabin until late. I stayed up waiting for him, and the silence came again around midnight. The same deep stillness that made the air feel wrong. I sat in the dark, listening. Then came the faint crunching again, slow, uneven steps, moving somewhere around the clearing. I could almost track them by sound, the way they shifted from one side of the cabin to the other, stopping for long stretches before starting again. At one point, I thought I saw something pass through the thin line of light from the window, a dark shape, quick and low. I couldn't tell if it was a person or an animal, but it moved on 2 legs, not 4. I stayed still until I finally heard my dad's truck pulling up the road. The noise of the engine broke through the quiet like a shock. The forest came back to life almost immediately. Crickets started again, leaves rustled, and the air felt lighter. The suddenness of it made me realize how unnatural that silence had really been. The next morning, I checked the ground again. More marks, this time clearer. Footprints, definitely human. Bare feet, narrow, long toes pressed deep into the dirt, as if whoever it was had been walking slowly, carefully. They circled the cabin, looping once around before heading off toward the woods. For the rest of the week, I never slept properly. The nights alternated between normal and silent. Every time the stillness came, the feeling returned, the sense that something was out there, standing just far enough away that I couldn't see it, waiting. On our last night, the silence came earlier than before, right after sunset. My dad had gone to bed early, but I stayed awake, sitting by the window. The forest was a solid wall of black beyond the clearing. No movement, no sound. Then, faintly, I saw something. At the edge of the clearing, between 2 trees, there was a shape tall, still, human. It wasn't close enough to see detail, but I could make out the outline. It stood there for what felt like minutes, not moving. The air was so quiet I could hear my own breathing. Then, slowly, it turned and walked back into the trees. By morning, it was gone. The prints in the dirt were deeper this time, leading straight out from the woods to the spot where the figure had stood, then back again. We packed up that day. I didn't tell my dad what I'd seen. I just wanted to leave. When we drove away, I looked back through the trees and caught a last glimpse of the cabin. Small, faded, and alone. Months later, I asked one of the logging guys about that place. He said it had been used for years, but most workers avoided staying overnight. They said the woods went dead, sometimes, like the whole forest just stopped breathing. He told me it started after someone went missing out there years back. A worker who'd wandered off during a snowstorm and never turned up. The company assumed he froze or fell somewhere deep in the woods, but they never found a body. I don't know if it was connected, or if there's any explanation at all for what I experienced. But I know this: when the woods go completely silent, that kind of silence that eats every other sound, it's not nothing. Something is there. It's just quiet enough not to be seen. It was just past midnight when I started my drive home. I had been helping a friend with some last-minute workout at a job site about an hour outside of town, and by the time I finished, everyone else had already left. I didn't think much of it. I've done plenty of late drives before. It was summer, still warm even at night, and the air smelled heavy with dirt and grass. I had a thermos of coffee in the cup holder and the radio playing quietly, just enough noise to keep me awake. The first half of the drive was easy. I took the main highway for a while, which was wide and smooth and mostly empty. Every few miles, I'd pass a semi-truck or a car heading in the opposite direction, their lights flashing by in seconds. After about 30 minutes, I reached the exit that led to the county road, an old, winding stretch that cut through farmland and low hills. I always took that route because it shaved off about 15 minutes, but I never really liked it. There were no streetlights, barely any houses, and the cell service dropped to nothing about halfway through. Still, I told myself it was fine. I just wanted to get home. Once I turned off the highway, everything got quieter. The sound of my tires on the asphalt was the only thing breaking the silence. The road curved gently through fields and clusters of trees. In the distance, I could see the faint outline of barns and silos against the sky. The headlights only reached so far, and beyond that, The darkness was thick and empty. I drove like that for about 20 minutes before I noticed something strange up ahead. At first, I thought it was just another car parked on the shoulder. I could see a pair of dim red taillights glowing through the trees. But as I got closer, I realized the car wasn't running. The lights were on, but the engine was off. It was sitting at an odd angle, halfway on the road, like someone had stopped suddenly. I slowed down as I approached. The car looked old, maybe a dark green sedan, early 2000s model. The driver's side door was open, and the interior light glowed faintly. The rest of the area was pitch black. I looked around, expecting to see someone walking or maybe trying to flag me down, but there was no one. The car had one flat tire, the rear right one. The rim was sitting low, and there were small shards of something scattered around it, maybe glass or gravel. I didn't stop. I drove past slowly, keeping one hand tight on the wheel, trying to look without making it obvious. When I passed the front end of the car, I caught a glimpse of the inside. The seats were empty. There was a jacket lying on the hood, a half-empty water bottle on the roof, and the driver's door was still wide open, like whoever was driving had gotten out in a hurry. I told myself they must have gone to get help, but something about the scene didn't feel right. No hazards flashing, no signs of a struggle, but no signs of anyone either. Just the open car sitting in the middle of nowhere. I kept driving. The feeling in my chest got heavier with every mile. I couldn't stop glancing at the mirrors, half expecting to see headlights appear behind me. But the road stayed empty. About 10 minutes later, the road narrowed and dipped into a wooded area. The trees grew thick on both sides, and my headlights barely cut through the darkness ahead. The air felt different there, denser, quieter. I rolled my window up, turned the radio down even lower, and tried to focus on the center lines. Then I saw something ahead again. At first, I thought it was just an animal crossing the road, but as I got closer, I realized it was a person, a man. He was standing right at the edge of the road, facing away from me. He wasn't moving, just standing completely still. I slowed down fast. He was wearing dark jeans and a jacket, maybe gray or brown. It was hard to tell in the headlights. He didn't have a flashlight, and there wasn't a car anywhere nearby. I tapped my brakes and moved slightly to the opposite lane, trying to give him space, but he didn't turn or move, just stood there, facing the trees. For a few seconds, I thought about stopping, but something in me said not to. There was no reason for him to be standing there like that. No reason to be out here at all. I eased back onto the gas and passed by slowly, keeping my eyes straight ahead. As my car went past him, I caught a glimpse in the mirror. He still hadn't turned around. That stretch of road seemed to go on forever after that. My hands felt slick on the steering wheel, and my heart was pounding harder than it should have been. I told myself over and over that it was nothing, just some guy walking or waiting for someone. But that didn't make sense. No car, no bag, no flashlight. Just standing there in the dark. A few minutes later, I noticed lights behind me. Headlights. At first, I was relieved. Finally, another vehicle. But then I realized how sudden they appeared. One moment the road behind me was completely black, and the next, two bright lights were following in the distance. I thought maybe it was someone who had turned onto the road after me, but as I kept driving, the lights didn't stay distant. They were getting closer, fast. Within a minute, the car behind me was maybe 3 or 4 car lengths away. Too close. I adjusted my speed, but no matter what I did, speeding up, slowing down, they matched it perfectly. My stomach felt tight. I stared in the mirror, trying to make out what kind of car it was, but the headlights were too bright. I turned down the next small road I saw just to test it. It was a narrow gravel road, barely big enough for 2 vehicles. I didn't recognize it, but I figured if they followed me, I'd know it wasn't a coincidence. The headlights followed. That's when the panic really hit. I pressed harder on the gas, kicking up dust and gravel. My tires crunched and skidded on the uneven road, but I didn't care. I just needed to put distance between us. I drove for maybe a mile, winding through what looked like fields and tree lines. The headlights stayed behind me the entire time. Finally, I spotted a small clearing to the right, a gap between two trees that led into an open patch of land. I turned in, cut the headlights, and rolled the car as far back into the dark as I could. My heart was hammering. I could barely breathe. I sat completely still. Through the windshield, I could see the glow of the other car's headlights as it came closer down the gravel road. Then it slowed down. The lights got brighter, sweeping across the trees, scanning. They stopped right near the turnoff where I had pulled in. I could see the silhouette of the car now, a small SUV, maybe silver or white. It idled there for what felt like forever, lights washing over the branches, before it slowly started to move again. The headlights disappeared down the road until everything went dark again. I stayed there for a long time before I dared to start my car again. I waited until the night felt still, then crept back onto the gravel road and followed it until it met the main road again. I didn't see another vehicle the entire rest of the way home. When I finally pulled into my driveway, it was nearly 2:30 in the morning. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring out at the quiet street in front of my house, trying to calm down. I checked my mirrors again before getting out. Empty. No lights. No movement. Inside, I couldn't sleep for hours. My brain kept replaying everything. The empty car with the open door, the man standing by the trees, the headlights following me. It all felt connected somehow, like parts of something I didn't understand. The next day, I checked the local news and the police blotter, thinking maybe I'd see something about a car accident or a missing person, but there was nothing. No mention of a stranded car. No mention of anyone found along the road. Nothing at all. A few days later, I drove that route again during daylight. I found the stretch where I had seen the parked car, but it was gone. No tire marks, no glass, no sign it had ever been there. I found the spot where the man had been standing too, but in the sunlight, it just looked like another patch of trees, quiet, normal, empty. I still don't know what really happened that night. Maybe I stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe someone was trying to make me stop. I'll never know for sure, but I haven't taken that road again since. Now, whenever I drive at night, I keep my doors locked, my speed steady, and I never, ever stop for anything in the road. It's strange how fast a normal drive can turn into something you think about for years after. The kind of night that reminds you how far away help really is when the world around you goes completely dark.